Howdy y'all, this is Steven. Today's DuFrane discussion, it's not just a walk in the park, so to speak, but I've got my better half and my fourth child, Rothko. And if you saw the Instagram, you saw the story about him being the official DuFrane mascot. So that's Rothko, that's Whitney. Today's discussion is actually going to be about assembly. So I'm going to show a video, probably time lapse it, on assembling a Bergstrom. There's only a few of those pieces left. Hopefully it won't be too involved. I hope you enjoy it and get a sense of how I actually assemble the pieces. Thank you.
Stop. Pretty good, I'll see.
Oh, and by the way, just a quick shout out to the folks at Summer Moon. Not that this is sponsored by Summer Moon, but one of the greatest coffee roasters here in Austin. Let's do some assembly. So what we're going to start with is how we affix the dial to the actual movement. So once we get the old, they're called finger cots, not finger condoms. They're called finger cots. So here's the Swiss-made Unitas 6497. It's finished in a nice perlage. Beautiful, beautiful movement. So first step is to actually unscrew the fastener that attaches to the dial feet. So in this particular movement, the dial feet are pressed into a little hole, and then these screws actually tighten down and fix into the feet itself. So we'll put the actual wheel on. We line it up. You can see the feet actually fit into those holes, and then we simply screw down the feet. Okay, and from this stage now we're going to put the actual hands on here. So we take an hour hand, and since there's no date on this particular movement, it's irrelevant where you actually apply the hand. On a watch such as this one that has a date wheel, it's very important that you align the hands to the time at which, when midnight hits, that the date wheel actually flips over. Since there's no date here, you can actually just affix the hour hand at any point, ensuring that it's level, and then you can adjust it. As you can see, you can adjust it to then that 12 o'clock point. And then we'll fix the second hand. It's a tiny, tiny little second hand. A little bit of a steady hand required for this one. And it's important that, again, it's level. This is called Rothko. This is a very important tool for any kind of assembly to clean, not only clean, but it also has a tactile, like a putty, and so it'll pick up all the little loose lint and dust and so forth. But once you have the second hand on there, it's very important that you make sure or ensure that the hand will not, catch on that second hand. So it's very important that those hands are very flush, very level, and seated appropriately on the respective pinions. Okay, so then the next one is the hour hand. And these are really, really great hour hands. There's a company, there's a company that makes these. They're diamond cut, so they're just very well finished, very crisp. Swiss Superluminova is applied to them. So we'll get that loosely seated, and then I simply align it so that, again, it's very, very flush, and also very there we go. Sorry, I'm kind of speaking and working, and sometimes the brain can only do one or the other. But again, making sure they're very flush so that there's no catching, if you will, on the hands, and then lined up, obviously, because you want, when it's straight up 2 o'clock as example, you want that 2 o'clock to be, precise. Same thing, 6 o'clock, you want it to be very straight, north and south, if you will. And you can see how I'm holding the movement. There's a wheel back here that you definitely do not want to put any torque or pressure on, so I'm holding to the side of that particular point. Now you'll notice there's some tools that I'll use on a different watch that the movement actually sits inside of this, and then I use a hand press to actually put the hands on. But for the Bergstrom piece, I don't need to do that. It's very it's just such a big piece, if you will. It's very easy to navigate around without some of these other specific tools. But next phase is to really just kind of clean up anything on the dial. You want it to be free of any lint, any dust particles. That's a sign of a well-assembled watch, I think, is to not have anything under the dial. I've got these obviously magnifiers on so I can see everything, but to the naked eye you may not be able to see a lot of these things, but I think it's well worth actually going through the process of ensuring all of these things are cleaned up. It might be a bit boring to watch right now, but I think it's worth it in the end to those that do put a loop on, and I know you're out there, that you'll take a look and make sure there's no imperfections, any dust particles, anything like that. Okay, so with that, that's looking pretty good. I'm going to release the hold on the stem, kind of set this to the side, and then I'll prepare the actual casing. So here's the Bergstrom case from my factory, and sometimes the case back is a little bit tighter than hand tight, so I have a case opening tool specific for each watch to remove the case back. Kind of the same thing I did on the dial. I want to make sure there's no dust, no lint, nothing underneath the dial, the crystal itself. And if I do spot anything, again, the beautiful Rodico, sorry if I'm coming out of the focus of the camera, or the view of the camera, but just ensuring that there's no under glass particles. Okay. So now we'll go ahead. And sometimes I have to do this a couple of times because just little lint particles. I don't have a completely clean room. I do a pretty good job of trying to keep everything clean in here, but you know, there is AC in the room. It tends to blow some dust and particles around that there's just no way to prevent that other than to just keep a diligent check on how everything looks. And everything looks really good right there. Okay, so once it's cased, I suppose, what I do next is put this, I'm going to cut the stem to the proper length, but I put that in there just to help alignment, and then the movement holder itself is what's placed next to secure it inside the case. Use this to kind of press it around. And you notice the movement isn't operational yet. I haven't wound it, I haven't given it any energy yet. And again, that helps with the hand placement, since this is what's called a non-hacking movement. There's no way to stop the movement when it's fully wound or when it's wound and has energy. And if you apply the hands and wait a little bit too long, you might miss the window of that perfect alignment. So I keep these unwound for that process. So just putting in a couple of movement holder screws that screw down to the Teflon movement holder, kind of making a solid piece, if you will, between the case and the movement. Tiny little screws. Actually, these are quite a bit larger than some of them, especially on the Salida and Ronda movements, much smaller movements, and so the screws are tiny. Okay, so that's pretty good. We have that cased. I still see pretty clean, no particles. So the next thing is I will take the crown back out and actually measure it and cut it to length. So I'll take the temporary crown off. It's just used for shipping, and these are obviously quite a bit longer than what is required in the watch, but it's that by design, so that depending on how big a watch or how small a watch, you can simply cut this to length. So use my micrometer and this very high-tech marking utensil. And this is preset to the 13.3 millimeters that is needed for the length on the Bergstrom case. So just simply mark the movement. Mark the stem, and take another very high-tech piece of equipment, snips. And I have a drawer down here. You might be able to see in that camera, but it's full of remnants of different stems from being cut for years. And I kind of like having them there just as a reminder of how many watches I've done. No other reason than that. Every now and then I'll take a vacuum and clean them up. And now what I'm doing is I'm using a file to simply clean up the snip, if you will, and also get any potential metal shards off of it. This is a little bit of Loctite. Typically don't need to do this, but I do it with every single movement. Just put a little bit of Loctite on it to keep that crown affixed to the stem itself. And then kind of start the thread I also, on the other pieces, the Travis and Waterloo and so forth, I have a tool. It's actually a stem cutter that I use. But this particular tool is for a much smaller diameter stem than what the Bergstrom uses, than the 6497 uses. So I'm just simply screwing down now the crown, holding the crown in place, or the stem in place, and then sliding it in. Now I'm just tightening down that screw that holds that stem in place. So now the push-pull operation of the 6497, very straightforward. There's a double gasket sealing system in here, so this still maintains some water integrity. It's about 50 feet. It's about a 3 ATM, about 50 feet. Every Bergstrom does have a push-pull, pull out just to set the time, and then push to actually manually wind. So there we go with the stem installed, and then what I do next is give it a wind. It's about we're fully wound about a 45-hour reserve time. So it's a big, huge mainspring inside of that inside of the canister. So I let it run for a bit. It's to let it kind of like get going, and then what I'll do, I'll probably stop the video and move the cameras to get over there. But then I actually test each one and regulate it to proper, what I say is anywhere between plus or minus 8 seconds a day. I typically get them around plus 2-ish, but it's a pretty delicate system to time these. So I'll get that timed, and then the next step, we just simply case it and then do the rest of the assembly in terms of putting the straps on and the packaging and the kit and all that kind of stuff. So hope that was somewhat interesting, but I'll be back in just a second with how we go about regulating it. Okay, let's get to the, all right, let's get to doing some tweaks here. All right, let's see how it runs. You can see by the time grapher, we're running a little bit of bead error, about a half a millisecond of bead error, and running plus 20. So first, let me work on adjusting that amplitude a little bit. And so I use a really high-tech piece of equipment here. It's called whoops, I'm going the wrong way. It's called a toothpick. So I just adjusted it the wrong way. So let me bring this back and change that just slightly. Tiny, tiny little movements. Now, see how that bead error has adjusted down from what had started at half a second. Now it expanded to 1.3, and as soon as it catches up here, there you go, on the time grapher, you'll see that it's now 0.2. So that also adjusted the timing just a little bit. I'm usually pretty happy with in that 0.2 to 0. I'm going to try to tweak it just a hair more. Let's see if I can get that. What you want is basically a solid line instead of, for this one you can see there's a slight gap in the middle. So I'm going to work that again just a little bit. I think I may have passed the phase. Bring it back just a hair. It's really, really sensitive. And so it's typically recommended for those that are wanting to do any kind of tweaks to timing a watch to leave this particular part of the regulation to those that kind of understand it and have a touch, because you can really create some wonkiness in the movement. So let me go ahead now and make a slight adjustment to the actual timing. Oh, we're running plus. Let me bring that and slow it down just a little bit. And these are just ever so tiny little adjustments. So that you can't even barely perceive visually that lever adjustment, but on that you can see that's changed the timing by probably 16 seconds. So we'll let the timer catch up. Okay, it's +4. So now it's really fine-tuned. What I generally do is just kind of like slide my adjusting tool, my toothpick, against that lever to really, really tiny change in where that adjusts. And a lot of times I'll, over adjust, and it creates a negative, timing event. But typically, if I can get it into that, and this is probably going to be where this one stays, into that plus for 2 to 4 range for at a 64, 97, 98. I'm usually pretty happy with that. For the Solitas and the Rondas, I usually get those around +1. They actually have a micro adjusting screw, and you can really fine tune those, where this one is actually interacting with the lever itself, and it's really hard to make super fine adjustments. So all right, I'm relatively happy with that. I'm going to just keep tweaking it as slightly as I can to see if I can bring that down just a hair. But again, this is just in one position. You wear a watch in multiple positions each day, and so that's why I'm usually pretty happy with running this thing in that +2 to +4 range. It might have overcorrected there. It's just so delicate, as you can see. You can't even tell that I'm moving it, but it just very gently changes the timing. So that I'm pretty happy with. That's going to probably flatline out, or maybe go +1 or +2. That should make the new owner pretty happy. So last step is just simply putting the case back on it, and then doing putting the strap on and putting it in the packaging. So we're pretty much done with this one. On to the next.